Today I'm meeting with Steve Haverts of the Family Counseling Center, and we're going to talk about a subject that is too long in coming, and so I'm grateful that he was willing to talk about this subject because it comes up frequently in family settings and in personal settings as well. But Steve, before we talk about that, would you please give those that are watching the contact information for you and your office in case anyone would like to speak with you afterward on this subject matter?
Yes, we are the Family Counseling Center, a nonprofit agency, and we do outpatient behavioral health care counseling. And we are located at 650 East, 4500 South in Murray. We're in Suite 300. Our phone number is 801-261-3500.
And the subject we're going to be talking about today is dealing with grief and loss.
Yes, grief and loss is something that's certainly near and dear to my heart, and it's something I've focused some attention on over the years as a result of two very personal losses that I've experienced. I lost my wife in 2003, and then my daughter, 9-year-old daughter, in 2009, unrelated illnesses. And as a therapist, I have been in the field for 25 years and in management positions for half of that time. I have noticed that therapists tend to not know how to deal with grief, and it is even an uncomfortable subject for many therapists. When I first started in the field and training, I was taught to go to the stages of grief that many are familiar with. I think all people have heard of the stages of grief and loss: the denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And oftentimes I would write on the board these stages and try to fit clients' grieving process into those 5 categories. And I always felt a little uncomfortable doing that because I felt like we were putting people that were grieving any type of loss. Now, this can be a death all the way up to simply losing your keys on a daily basis sometimes. So you and us, we all experience grief differently, and we don't go through stages, and research has actually showed that there are no stages associated with grief. The original intent of Kubler-Ross, who developed the 5 stages, was her efforts in working with cancer, terminally ill patients who were dying. And so she developed this model of death and dying, and professional therapists and professionals in the helping profession said, "Oh, that's a great model. Let's apply that to those who have suffered a loss." And so
I'm sure there were some overlaps.
Oh, yeah.
But just not a perfect overlap is what you're saying.
There's definitely overlaps, but I think the problem with indicating that we are going to go through stages of grief is that clients, we put clients in a box, and what if they don't go through denial? What if they don't experience anger associated with their loss? Does that mean they're abnormal, and do we make them feel abnormal because they didn't experience those feelings? For me personally, I didn't experience some of those feelings or stages, and it was different for each one of those losses. So I started realizing I can't put my clients into this box or these stages and say, this is what you're going to go through. The real limitations are that, for example, in the medical field, when you have, and I've had several knee surgeries, the doctors will say you have 4 to 6 week recovery, and normal people will heal in those 4 to 6 weeks. And if you're an outlier, if you heal more quickly, then wonderful, but what if you don't heal within those 4 to 6 weeks and you're worse maybe? you're abnormal and something different needs to be done. With grief and loss, we really can't and shouldn't average people's feelings together and say, this is what a normal person is going to experience, because there are many normal people who are very resilient and don't go through any stages of loss. They just go to the acceptance and have accepted it. This is the way life is, and I'm okay.
If we don't have some kind of general category, though, is it hard for people who aren't professionals to know how to deal with their friends and loved ones who have suffered a loss and are somehow suffering something? And we may not. I think maybe people like having a nice little category or a set of stages because they can think, oh, good, I can look for the telltale signs or something. So what do we do if because I can see what you're saying. Sometimes people might say, I wasn't angry. I've suffered a lot of loss, I've suffered a lot of hardship as a result, but anger isn't one of those things, or denial wasn't one of them, like you said. What do you think people ought to do when they see somebody they care about dealing with a loss?
Yeah, great question.
If they don't put them into that nice little box that you talked about.
Yeah, great question. So how I started looking at grief and loss is we have anything is normal except when someone goes out into what we would diagnose as a mental health condition. And so any feelings that someone may experience can be considered normal, and that's where professional counseling is very helpful, is to help and guide, is this normal? My thoughts, my feelings, are they within that normal range? So the outliers are if someone starts experiencing symptoms of depression, and it takes a professional counselor or someone in the healthcare field to be able to diagnose depression. If someone has post-traumatic stress related to a loss, that would be something you'd want to be aware of. If someone starts using substances, illicit drugs or other chemicals to cope, then that would be dysfunctional. If someone starts experiencing anxiety, panic attacks, then that would be abnormal. So I think as people, we can recognize when someone is laying in bed all day long and not associating with their family or friends or not going to work. That would be abnormal. But if someone is really struggling emotionally with the loss, but their functioning is normal, and they can go throughout the day and their relations with people are fairly normal in their normal range.
Would that include somebody who just stays in bed for a couple of days, or someone who just kind of doesn't hang around the same crowd for a little bit and takes, I mean, we can give them a few days, right?
Absolutely.
We can agree that we're not going to call that person or send them a bunch of email where we might say, hey, he's showing or she's showing up to work, but kind of give her some, I mean, we're okay with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So people that have suffered a tremendous loss, any type of loss, and they're struggling even for several weeks, that's pretty normal. You know, someone who, like, I really don't feel like having contact with people. My appetite is decreased. Those are certainly normal experiences that people would go through if they suffered a tremendous loss in their life.
I'm sure you have an opinion, even though we don't know each other that well, but given your background, I'm sure you have an opinion on this. I'm going to ask. If somebody has suffered a serious loss, obviously if somebody is really depressed over losing keys, that person probably does have mental health issues, but not related to grief. But what about the stigma people might have about saying, yeah, you know, this loss hit me harder than I thought? In fact, I can think of an example. Someone I went to college with was adopted, and then in his mid-20s, for some reason, I don't know if it was his idea or his biological father's, but it's like, we're going to meet. And this guy, I'd known him for years, seemed to have it all together. And he was like, yeah, you know, I'm not really thrilled to be meeting my biological father, but at the very least there's some curiosity. So yeah, I'm looking for it. And anyway, met his biological father, and it just wrecked him. And he had no idea. He figured, I'll just satisfy my curiosity. He goes, but for whatever reason, I just collapsed. I just couldn't function. I couldn't focus. I didn't finish finals. I mean, that sort of thing. And it's not like he wanted to kill himself or anything like that, but he's just like, it just hit me so unexpectedly. And it didn't take him a long time, but it was a very sudden and very catastrophic change. I don't know if he ever went to any counseling, so you can see where I'm going. What do you tell people who may think, well, I don't want to go see a counselor because I don't want to be branded or labeled as mentally ill or unable to handle life's normal ups and downs? What would you say to somebody who's feeling like that?
Yeah, very normal feelings. I think that counseling is becoming more and more acceptable, but we have a long way to go to get to the point where there is not a stigma for going to counseling.
What happens to people who don't get counseling and should, or at least go to a counselor to find out if they should? I mean, what are they missing out on? Because maybe some people are saying, oh, well, maybe I'll suffer a little bit more, but I'll get over it.
I'll pull myself up by my bootstraps.
And yeah, maybe I suffered needlessly and I could have benefited from some counseling, but it wasn't really necessary. So, I mean, what do you say to people who feel that way?
I think like anything else is give it a try, give it a shot. Meet with a therapist, a counselor who understands grief and loss. And I'm not saying that the counselor has to have experienced a significant loss to understand. I think that just to understand if you're in the normal range, if you're in that normal process, your friend, for example, it hit him hard for whatever reasons that hit him hard, and it would have been nice for him to have someone to bounce things off of and say, why do you think this hit me so hard? Let me explore that with someone who has some expertise in the field to understand if it's normal what I'm feeling or experiencing.
And I'm thinking as we talk, I mean, he would have been able to handle it better in the moment, but also perhaps to foresee problems with other relationships that might grow out of this or something like that. And I mean, I think he's doing well now, but it was just I think, my mother has died, and I'm the oldest of my siblings, and we all dealt with it differently, and it's just interesting. You never know how that's going to rear its ugly head later. And so I just, I used to be very skeptical of counseling. I used to think that it was often a knee-jerk reaction in my line of work to say, get these people to counseling, get these people to counseling. And I think that's not a good thing, just a kind of knee-jerk. But I will say personally that I don't have the same reluctance to tell people to do that, or even for myself. If I were really struggling and felt like this just isn't me, or I'm not functioning well, I wouldn't see that as a flaw. I would see that as a problem to fix, as opposed to having to say, yep, I'm a defective human being who can't really be among normal people. Do you see generally people who deal, let's talk about this within the family context. When you see adults or children dealing with a separation and a divorce situation, are we generally handling this properly? Are we handling it well? And if we aren't, what would you suggest people should be doing? Is that a good question?
I think it's a very relevant and great question. For research shows that for the most part, people are resilient. People deal with loss in a fairly healthy way. And so that's good news. For family situations where divorce is involved and children are impacted, then long term, those children can, as we're finding out now, can suffer ramifications down the road as an adult because of the variety of circumstances that those two parents may have created for their children. And I think it would always be helpful to, at least in divorce situations, to have an assessment done to make sure that everyone in the family is coping well, that they understand what's going on, understand the process, and keep the lines of communication open so that the children aren't harboring or misinterpreting, and that they feel like they have somewhere to go for answers. So that grief and loss that is going to hit them associated with the divorce does not trail behind them as baggage for the rest of their life. So
would that be true for the parents? As I hear you saying that, I'm thinking there may be some parents that, again, don't realize the effect it's having on them. They don't even, people say, hey, you're not the same person you were. It's like, what do you mean? And so they may benefit from that too. Or even just like you say, to be told, yeah, you're having a hard time right now, but that's normal for the circumstances, but you're dealing with it about as well as can be expected. That could really be a boost to somebody who may not know where they stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would say yes, parents should be included in that. So children, even just having an assessment done by a professional, and maybe even just bringing the whole family in and talking about what's going to happen next and what the processes are. I know mediators in the court system tend to do a pretty good job of helping project through that. But a professional counselor would be the next step to take to be able to open those lines of communication.
But if you get divorced without kids and you're in your 40s, then you can probably skip the therapy step, right? No, in other words,
it would be nice to assume that. But.
Yeah, but even, just because children are not involved doesn't mean that you can't have a difficult divorce or that you can suffer a lot of the same sense of loss.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you think about, in counseling, one of the techniques that may be used is to help you identify what you're losing in association with the loss. So list out the things that it could be you're losing a sense of yourself, you're losing love, you're maybe having to change occupation, you're maybe having to change living environments. And that's difficult. Those are all losses that you would experience. And
irrespective of whether there's kids involved or not.
Absolutely, yeah. Loss of money. But then on the other side, what are you gaining? So this, even though I have this loss, and this goes across the board for any loss, what have I lost and what am I gaining as a result of this loss? And explore that with a professional therapist so that you can know that I'm thinking about this correctly.
What have I lost? What am I gaining? Or perhaps if you don't see much gain, it's like, how can I compensate as well?
Maybe you're not able to see some things that you're gaining, and maybe someone else, as you're bouncing this off, they can say, well, what about this? Maybe there's this that you have missed or looked over.
Now let's get down to a couple of nitty-gritty details then. In a situation like that, how, on average, again, we were trying to say that there are a lot of different people on the scale, but on average, somebody who's dealing with a catastrophic loss like a death or a divorce or something like that, how long do they typically spend in counseling, and how much can they expect it to cost them if it isn't covered by insurance?
Great question. I always hate to predict time.
Right. And I don't want to do that either, but some people will still know. It's like, look, I know that each person's different, but it's nice to have an average just to know where to start. So,
simply, if you're going to a therapist who is a Freudian, psychoanalytic, which there's not many of them anymore nowadays, you can expect to be in therapy for years. If nowadays we have solution-focused, brief therapy, so 8 to 10 sessions is usually fairly adequate to deal with something. Here at Family Counseling Center, we're about $90 an hour if you're cash, self-pay. And it can range anywhere from $75 all the way up to possibly a couple $100 an hour.
Some people are worried, even though they want to get the help, they don't want there to be any kind of paperwork, or at least minimal paperwork. So cash is a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That can be done.
Yeah, and we have clients who are concerned about that, and definitely cash or payment plans are certainly acceptable.
Well, thank you for sharing with us this, because again, I haven't addressed it up to this point, and it's something that should have gotten attention a lot sooner, and I'm so thankful that you were willing to take the time to go over that. Finally, for those that would like to talk with you or see about what Family Counseling Center could do for them, would you give them your contact information one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Steve Haverts, and I am the Executive Director at Family Counseling Center. We're a nonprofit organization. located at 650 East, 4500 South in Murray. And our phone number, if you want to reach our receptionist, 801-261-3500.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.